Can you hear, everyone hear me well? Yes? What about now? All right. Good afternoon. I am Jason Marsh, the Deputy Commissioner of the Virgin Islands Police Department. For the individuals that showed up, thank you very much for taking the time out to come and hear us speak in reference to our consent decree, progress we have made, and overall about our police department. Here with me, I have several individuals that work with myself on the consent decree. My team, I have Dr. Cannonier, Captain Benta, Director of Internal Affairs, Vivian Newton, and my Force Inspector Investigator for the St. Thomas District, Lieutenant Sherry-Ann Hughes. So thank them for coming. I also have Attorney Shonda Willis of the local AG's office. And to my left, Ms. Sydney Roberts, who is the independent monitor, and her team, and she'll introduce her team members.
Thank you, Jason, and good evening, everyone, and thank you for coming. As Jason mentioned, my name is Sydney Roberts. I'm the independent monitor for the Virgin Islands Police Department consent decree. I was appointed in November of 2022. Just a little bit about my background. I spent about 20 years in law enforcement. My last position was as Chief of the Illinois Secretary of State Police. I also spent about 10 years as an inspector general investigating misconduct, government corruption, fraud, waste, and abuse. And just before joining the company that I work for, Jensen Hughes, I was leading Chicago's Civilian Office of Police Accountability. And I'm also an attorney. Just a quick little blurb about my company, or our company, before I introduce our other team members that are here today as well. But our company, Jensen Hughes, has been doing law enforcement doing law enforcement consulting, apologies, for about 15 years. Our consulting services largely police assessments, looking at agencies, seeing how well they're doing, identifying opportunities for them to improve, and also to improve their relationships with the community. But we also do work such as this, which is serving as monitors for other police agencies in their consent decrees. With me is Ed Denmark from our firm. Ed, you want to introduce yourself?
Good evening. I'm Ed Denmark. I'm with Jensen Hughes. I'm a senior consultant with them. I spent 31 years in law enforcement from the state of Massachusetts. And those 31 years, I was chief of police for 2 different municipalities for a total of 20 years as the chief executive for the police department. Since I came on Jensen Hughes full-time in January, but prior to that, started working with them as a part-time consultant back in 2018. My areas of focus are generally use of force issues, community building, community relationships, de-escalation, fair and impartial policing, bias policing, and doing leadership and executive development. I'll pass the mic to my colleague, Bob.
Good evening, everybody. My name is Bob Bomer. I've been with the company for 7.5 years. I started out in the Chicago Police Department, left there, became general counsel, chief of staff of a state justice agency in Illinois. After that, spent another around 10 years working with community policing, providing technical assistance, providing training, and also working with community engagement between some communities, especially in the Chicago area, as between the police department and the communities in the Chicago area. So thank you.
Thank you, Bob. And we also have 6 other persons that are working on our team. All of them are former chiefs of police, the Boston Police Department, Charlotte Police Department, San Jose Police Department in California. We have another gentleman who's former DEA, spent a lot of time working in internal affairs. And I give you this background just to provide some context that we've been working with law enforcement agencies, both as practitioners, but also in helping law enforcement agencies to build better relationships with their community, to have better policing policies, to have better training so that their outcomes are the outcomes that need to occur with respect to their respective communities. And here, our goal is to work to ensure that the Virgin Island Police Department is compliant with the consent decree. And I look forward to continuing to work with everybody and getting to know you.
All right, thank you. So I forgot to mention, we have Acting Commissioner Mario Brooks here with us, along with Chief Phillip, to show the support of the Commissioner's Office in ensuring that we do what needs to be done to get us out of this consent decree and ensure that we continue to police our community the way we're supposed to. So just to give you a brief history of the consent decree, it all started in 2004. Oh, yes, I did. Yes. Yeah, I did. Back in 2004, the Department of Justice investigated the police department, started an investigation into our police department for patterns and practices of violating our civil rights, our individual civil rights. That was in 2004. During that investigation, they found that we were in fact doing that. And in 2005, they issued us a letter of intent, which the letter specified things that we as a department needed to do to ensure that we stop violating our individuals' rights. Unfortunately, we did not complete that list of the stuff that it needed done by that time. In 2009, March of 2009, DOJ, US DOJ took us to court, Civil Rights Court, hence the consent decree, which was signed in March of 2009. The consent decree is a list of things that we as a department must do to maintain, to ensure that we are not violating people's civil rights. So how has the consent decree helped us? Because I know there is a misconception that the consent decree have not helped the department. So while financially it costs us, but overall it has made us a better agency, because the consent decree has mandated us to create policies that we didn't have before. It mandated us to ensure that our personnel were trained appropriately when dealing with the public. So the consent decree, while it doesn't specifically speak to crime or the community on a whole, it's all relative, simply because we must engage our citizens. And the engagement of our officers with our citizens, we must make sure that those engagements are done the right way, and our officers are professional in how they deal with individuals. So what we did, we developed policies to aid in the review of uses of force in a citizen complaint process. So while that process sometimes, well, we know force must be used. Not must, but 9 out of 10 times during arrest, sometimes officers do use force. And we must ensure that while the officers use force, that they do it appropriately. They do it within the confines of the law and our policies. So hence why we have such extensive policies that were created to direct our personnel in how to utilize force while dealing with our community. The citizen complaint process, you hear the ads on the radios. The citizens have a right to make a complaint if they feel that they have not been treated fairly or by our officers. That process, the supervisors, we take a complaint, Internal Affairs takes the complaints, issues it a number. That number is used to track your complaint through the system. Your complaint is investigated, and at the end of that process, you receive a letter saying, well, hey, yes, we did find that our officers violated policy, or no, they did not. Or either which we are not sure, based on the evidence that we received. So that's just a simple, short way of how our investigative processes work. We are open to any questions or any ideas that the community has in reference to how we police, and try to ensure that at the end of the day, we are here to serve the community, and that's our function. We're here to serve and protect. So we must ensure that we do that within the confines of the law as well. So to aid us in this process, I'm just going through my notes. You may have noticed that the officers are now using body-worn cameras. The body-worn cameras were implemented in April of 2022 to ensure that we are able to capture the interaction with the citizens, every interaction with a citizen. So that in itself helps us with our investigative process. Once on camera, people tend to act differently. So once the officers have the cameras on from the beginning to the end of the interaction, that allows us to go back when a complaint is filed, see what our officers did during this interaction. So we know that sometimes our officers can do things better, and that's the purpose of whether they maybe need to be trained or disciplined or just having a conversation with. So we use that process to ensure that we can see and the public is aware that this process is in place for transparency with our officers and the community. Any questions so far? Susan?
Will a body-worn camera be made public in the event that there's an incident?
That depends on the incident. And we know that our officers have their contracts prohibit us from doing a lot of things because, as you know, so that would depend on the investigative process and what is it that we will be releasing, if anything. But it definitely helps us with our investigation. I didn't want to say that, but yes.
Thank you. Good evening. Based on all of the based on about all the recommendations of the monitors, have all the policies been created and implemented?
So the recommendations are not from the monitors. The recommendations are based from the court. So the U.S. Department of Justice is who conducted the investigations. So the monitors their function is to ensure that we comply with the rules of the consent decree to the letter. So the policies that we have in place, yes, all the policies that we have in place now will result and ensure that we are in compliance. We have to make sure that, short answer, yes.
And each of those compliances are time sensitive.
So when we started the consent decree back in 2009, it was a 5-year period, right? Said that we had to do 5 years and a 2-year monitoring period after we got substantial compliance with the entire consent decree. As you know, in 2018, we did get substantial compliance with the consent decree. That was December of 2018. During 2019, 2020, there were the previous independent monitoring team found some issues in some of our investigations and recommended that those paragraphs be taken out of compliance. So we didn't totally agree, let's make that clear. And I think in every one of our court filings, we show that why we didn't agree. But hence, the paragraphs are still out of compliance. So those policies, while they may aid us, we still have some work to do on our end to ensure that we do what we need to do to get out of the consent decree as well.
And if I may ask Ms. Roberts a question, please. Ms. Roberts, concerning building community trust and collaboration, such things like sensitivity training or even community education pertinent to how a officer may react in the event that you do something. What are some of the strategies that you believe that we could implement now to help us move forward?
To help to work with the, I'm sorry, I just want to make sure I understand the question. To work with the community or to work with the, or to benefit the officer?
I think in this case, both sides have to be represented because we won't be able to build that community trust, and we won't be able to protect our officers if we don't have them in the same discussion.
Yeah. So one of the things that, in my experience, that works well with with building that trust is through the oversight and accountability for use of force incidents. So that one, ensuring the community that a use of force incident will be reviewed or that a citizen complaint will be accepted and investigated. That the results of those reviews will be communicated to the impacted person if it's a citizen complaint or if it's a use of force, that the police department makes it clear that they are reviewing use of force incidents to the point of, there are collective bargaining agreements, so certain information cannot be shared, but some information can be shared, whether it's individual, whether it's unique, or whether it's to the aggregate, but assuring the community that there is a level of oversight of uses of force, citizen complaints, and that the community has feedback into that, but also for the officers to understand that, one, that they will be subject to review, that their actions will be subject to review or complaints will be investigated, but those investigations will be conducted thoroughly, fairly, and in accordance with all of their rights. And so one of the things that builds trust is knowing that even if I disagree with the outcome of that review or that investigation, that it actually occurred and that someone let me know about it. And so that to me opens up that dialogue, and that expectation is here within the confines of the consent decree.
Very well. And I'll wrap up with this last question and statement. The men and women of the VIPD work very hard, and they are in this consent decree. It has been some time that the officers have had to sort of traverse within the parameters of the consent decree, and it has also left some of them in a limbo of sorts, right? Whereas they may not want to do something because then they may say, if I do something a certain way, I'm going to get in trouble for it, and I'm just trying to do my job. And I think that this is where you and your team come in now, because we've been there, done that, right? And we're looking forward to seeing the fruits of your labor, because, we want to be able to get out of this consent decree so the men and women of the VIPD can do their jobs, which they do an excellent job of, And I think that a lot of training and support and outreach and education have taken place throughout these years, and I believe they're more than ready to get out. It's just for us to hit those time-sensitive marks and move forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, Senator. So let me just add a little more information to your question. So when we talk about training, right? So training was a part of the consent decree as well, but since training has since been removed, because that showed that the department have been doing training our personnel, giving the information they need to go out and police the community. So even in reference to dealing with individuals, we have interpersonal communication training for officers to show them, okay, this is how you speak to people sometimes. They may not like it, but interpersonal communication training. Scenario-based training, how to react in a use of force situation, even when active shooter training. So we actually have those types of training for our officers so how you train is how you react in every situation. So once we are confident that we give them the training they need to police our community within the confines of not just the consent decree, but the law as well. Okay, any other questions?
I got a question. I know that the police department is short-staffed. So how or has the consent decree impacted your recruitment and retention of officers in the department?
So the consent decree hasn't really impacted the recruitment portion of it. I'll say more the retention. Because if you realize we were much older police department, right? So we have younger officers coming in now. But a lot of the older officers now, it's a challenge. Because now we're asking supervisors to do things that they have never really done before. And so basically, they'd rather go home than actually do it in some instances. And a huge portion of this consent decree is supervisors and operations. They must do their part, because at the end of the day, a supervisor is responsible for the officers. They're responsible for the officers' actions while on duty. So as a supervisor, you have to ensure that you be fair in your investigations or your reviews, and let them know this is what you could have done better. And I think once we get that better communication lines within our, it's kind of like a culture shift. We have to change the culture in the way we were doing things before to how we must do it now to get out of this consent decree. Again, as the senator said, the officers work hard. They work very hard. At the same time, we must document what we do, and we must document it properly. Because once you write it today, and you end up in court 6, 7 months later, you're not going to be able to go back and change what was written that day of the incident. So we try to ensure that they get the training, what's necessary to thoroughly write down and document the information.
Okay, thank you. I got another question for the monitors. Do you have anybody local on your team? I think, earlier we were talking about the community. I think it's important that your team has at least some representative of our community. So do you have anybody in your team from the community?
No, you know what, we don't, and we talk internally about how we can do that. The one thing that I mentioned earlier is, although we come from many different police agencies, all of our police agencies on the mainland. It's not an island with 3 different unique communities. We don't know the island. We don't know the mechanics of the islands. And one of the things that we will be doing in the near future is actually holding listening sessions with the community so that we can hear directly from you on each of the individual islands. And we want to open up that dialogue with the residents and the people that are living here and traveling through here so that, we can hear firsthand. We've spent the last 6 months, we've spoken to more than half of the police department. We've looked at their policies. We've looked at some of the use of force reviews, citizen complaint reviews, and we have an idea of how the police operates from the perspective of the police. We have a perspective of the communities on the 3 throughout the territory from the police. We have not heard from the people that are not in law enforcement. And so one of the reasons why we were so happy to be able to come here was because this is our first opportunity to at least hear some of what is of concern for the community. But we will be holding listening sessions throughout our tenure as monitors. We will have a website where you will be able to reach out to us and communicate to us. We'll be posting our reports. We'll be announcing on that website when we will be having events. So we do plan to have a very active engagement with the community. But we, in terms of having somebody on our team from the island, totally understand and agree that there is a lot of value in that. It hasn't happened as of yet, but there's the potential for that. But until that happens, the one thing that we want to make sure that we do is that we open up lines of community because, as I said, each police department is different in our experience, but this is very different. Policing here is very different.
Well, just to follow up on that, the biggest critics of the police department are individuals that when you sit in a room with them, they're not really going to open up to you.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important for you to focus on getting someone on board, whether you do it through the police department or somebody independent. But I think that's really, really a huge step in gaining the trust of the citizens so that they can honestly share their experiences with you.
Thank you so much.
I wanted to quickly chime in on what Mr. Moore had mentioned because I think he made a very valid and powerful statement because the collective social identity of the Virgin Islands Police Department will differ than any other jurisdiction that you've ever
Yeah.
serviced, right? And I think it's very important that that voice, whether it's one or a few, that collaborates with you on that level is very important because you won't see the issues that you see on the mainland happening here. We have our share of issues, don't get me wrong, but you won't see those issues here because the social identity of the Virgin Islands does not lend itself to some of those things that you see on the mainland happening to racial bias and other issues. We've been raised to show respect and love one another. We have issues, yes, don't get me wrong, like any other place in the world. And of course, the men and women of the department have their jobs to do. But yes, I think it's a very, very valid statement, and I'm looking forward to hopefully you adapt that and help move forward in that aspect. Thanks.
Absolutely, and thank you. And we are try to be very, very mindful. And one of the things that we want to do in our approach to our monitorship is to really hear from the department for them to tell us what they think will solve some of their most pressing challenges, and to listen to that and try to shape what that solution looks like, because the men and women here have been policing this community. We have not. And they have to be a part of the solution rather than us telling them, you need to do X, Y, and Z. We all know where the goalpost is. And so it's talking to Jason and the assistant chief and Chief Phillips and saying, all right, this is the goalpost. How do you think we get there within the confines of the consent decree? Okay, well, have you thought about this, or this might be a little bit easier? It's kind of like I say, we look at the 4 Ps, you know. We're going to look at policy. What is the process? What are the what do the people have? Do they have what they need? Are there gaps? And what's the performance? And how do we measure that? But it has to be within the context of policing within this territory. And you just identified, you know, our Achilles heel is learning this island and hearing from the men and women that work here as well as live here. So thank you.
Just to kind of add to what Sydney is saying, so within the department, we have our own monitoring. We have the Captain Benter, who's in charge of the Change and Compliance Management Unit. Their job is to really monitor the department, review the cases, audit the cases, see where policy revisions may be necessary, where training may be necessary. So we have that within our department to ensure that after the monitors leave, we still continue to do the same thing all the time. So it's a process. We understand it's a process, and we want the community to understand it's a process that we're working to get out of the consent decree. So hence the forums, to ensure that they have the opportunity to come out and ask the questions. The reason we do it on the 3 different islands, to ensure that each island get their opportunity to speak to us, speak to the team, so we can hear it directly from them, instead of one stream or call it. Let's come out and touch the people and see what they have to say. Susan?
I appreciate you all being here. Sorry, for those who don't know me, I'm Suzanne Carlson from the Daily News. I appreciate you all being here. Thank you for coming out to the public and speaking in this way. I've got a number of questions, and I don't necessarily need to have them all answered right now. But I mean, can you speak a little bit to the issues with the length of time it's been taking to do investigations into potential officer misconduct or use of force? Because oftentimes those investigations drag on for so long that the period of time that the officer could face discipline has since expired.
So in some of those cases, the contracts allow us to toll the times. So we can put the times on hold while we conduct some of those investigations. And one of our major issues that we did have with some of those major cases was personnel. We understand that it takes a special skill set to conduct some of those high-level investigations. And I assume that's the ones you're talking about, right? So the skill set for some of those cases, some of those individuals left. So we had to in turn hire people, train them to do those types of investigations. So that's where that lied. And in order for us to not have those types of issues, we were hiring more people. We're training more people to do so. We're cross-training to ensure that everyone knows how to do someone else's job, basically. So we don't run into those types of issues anymore. When someone leaves, then we have no one. So that was really a manpower issue that we have since addressed.
That's good to know. I've got a couple more questions, and I'm sorry. I've got a couple more questions, and I'll let someone else take it. In terms of prosecutions, I'm aware of at least 8 cases that were referred to the Justice Department for prosecution by VIPD since 2019. Can anyone speak to why those cases weren't prosecuted, or why was it a lack of investigation on VIPD's part? Were they not worthy of merit? I don't know.
Okay, so the cases are referred to the Attorney General's office for opinions, not prosecution. So we conduct the investigation internally. We collect the facts of the case. So if you're talking about like officer-involved shootings, we collect the facts to ensure that the officers didn't break any laws. So what happens once we collect the facts of the information, we forward that information to the AG's office for an opinion. So we're not forwarding the case for prosecution. We're forwarding it for an opinion to see if the officer broke or violated any of our laws. If they did, then yes, they will prosecute. And I know for one case in particular that we did have a situation like that where the officer was arrested and subsequently went to trial. But if they decline to prosecute, or the opinion is that the officer didn't break any laws, then that's what that is. We don't forward it for prosecution. It's for an opinion.
But, okay, so to clarify, but it was significant enough to warrant forwarding to the Justice Department for an opinion. That it was a significant enough situation. I'm trying to phrase this in a way that makes sense.
So any officer-involved shooting is investigated both administratively and criminally to ensure that the officer didn't violate any law. So it's not that it was serious. We must do that because we want to make sure that police are held accountable just like any other citizen.
That's fair. I really wish that the contract allowed for more transparency with the public, because I think the public would have a lot more confidence in the department if they had some idea of an officer's background, the amount of administrative issues they'd had, complaints, violation, any kind of discipline they'd faced. None of that's public, and I think it's a real shame. But my last question that I'll leave you with, can you speak at all to the issues that officers are facing dealing with individuals in the community that are in mental health crisis? Because that seems to be where a lot of these use of force issues come up.
So we know that mental health is a governmental issue, right? And we know that because of how our government is set up right now, it leaves the police department to deal with those type of individuals as the lead. We know in most agencies, the police department is not the lead. They have individuals that actually respond with the officers to deal with those individuals that are in mental crisis. But what we do have is we have trained individuals. Dr. Cananero recently trained in, mental health, National Mental Health First Aid? Correct. So we have instructors. So we are instructing our officers to try to make them better in dealing with those individuals. But again, until we get that governmental issue taken care of, we will always be the first responders. We'll always be the ones to encounter those individuals, and we'll always be the ones to end up unfortunately using force on the individuals while they're in crisis, and we're not happy about it. But we still have to look out for the safety of the officers and the community while engaging those individuals.
It's an impossible situation. I agree. So, thank you all for your time.
All right, any other questions? I like this group. So again, just for the public know, we will be in St. John tomorrow at the Cleone Henrietta Creaky Legislative Annex from 6 to 8 p.m. We'll be on St. Croix at the Great Hall from 6 to 8 p.m. on Wednesday. And we really would like the community to come out and engage us, engage the monitoring team, engage VIPD, because we have all the personnel here right now that can answer the questions that you would like answered, hearing it directly from us, not from we call street attorneys. Right? So we're trying to get information out to everyone. And this is our best, we see this as the best way that we can do it, holding these forums. So we thank you, everyone that came out. No. I'll let Sydney wrap up, and then I'll close out.
No, I echo Jason's sentiments. Thank you for coming out. As I mentioned, we will be setting up a website. We'll be reaching out to various community organizations to let them know that we have set up this website as a means to get in touch with us. But also, I'd say, you know, hopefully look out for an announcement soon of when we'll be back to hold a listening session directly with the members of the community, soliciting specifically what your experience and perception has been, and also hearing from you what are some opportunities for the department to improve and identify those things that you guys think that they're doing well, and making sure that they know from you what you think they're doing well, so that they can double down on that. Again, thank you so much for coming out.
All right, well, that's it. Again, thank you. I'll see you guys tomorrow.